Hello and welcome back to Breaking the Consensus here at Protect Life. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. But before we get going, I'd like to ask you, first of all, to click on the subscribe button there. So any new material that you get, you will be advised of. And also the donate button is there, and anything you can do to help us out, we can promise we will use that as best we can. Tonight, I am very happy to be welcoming Alan Hynes, who works with the Catholic Education Partnership. Alan, hello.
Hello, Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So first of all, before we start off, Alan, can you explain who and what the Catholic Education Partnership is?
Okay, well, the Catholic Education Partnership, it's a relatively new body. It was set up a few years ago. Our birth was a little bit interrupted by COVID, but the bishops and religious orders set it up as an umbrella body for Catholic education in Ireland. So we kind of work to bring coherence. The Catholic education sector being quite fragmented, so lots of different bodies. So it's been brought into kind of a more coherent structure. So there's various different bodies now that I'd be closely connected with, and we kind of encourage collaboration, coordination across the Catholic education sector, and we'll be one of the lead voices in terms of dealing with the state or state agencies such as the NCCA, and we have a mandate from the Irish Episcopal Conference to speak with authority, let's say, on Catholic education in Ireland.
So what, if you're talking, you're involved with both primary and secondary. So what kind of numbers are you talking about of schools in Ireland are actually in that sector?
Well, our formal relationship is still just with post-primary, let's say, in terms of the management and patron trustee bodies. But we have a good working relationship with the primary trustee bodies. At the same time, I know this sounds a little bit mad, but it's still a work in progress. We have mandates to speak on behalf of certain things with respect to primary, and we'd be one of the lead negotiators, let's say, with the NCCA on certain curricular matters. There's about 2,850 primary schools under Catholic patronage in Ireland, so about 89% of all primary schools. At post-primary, it's roughly 50% of all post-primary schools are under Catholic patronage. And there's various different types of sole Catholic patronage, or in some cases we're in joint patronage with the ETBs, and in other cases we have an involvement in the school without being a patron. But in any event, we're quite a substantial presence within the Irish education sphere.
Okay, we're going to talk tonight about the SPHE, which is coming out, which is developed by, you've used the acronym a couple of times already, the NCCA. So you could first of all explain, what the NCCA is and what SPHE is.
Surely, yeah, no, education is filled with all these kind of letters. The NCCA is the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. So their job is to advise the minister on various aspects of curriculum, forming the curriculum for all the different subject areas within primary and post-primary. They would also be an important part in setting exam structures, so assessment structures, particularly within post-primary. So, as I said, they would form it and then propose it to the minister for her approval. But ultimately, it's still a matter for the minister to approve. But they're the main advisory body to the minister on these matters. SPHE then is social, personal and health education. So it's one of the leading subjects that they within the school, and would run alongside, let's say, PE. And we would also say, obviously, religious education will have a role, and the civil politics and society education too. So SPHE also incorporates the relationship and sexuality education. Now, in the past, they were treated as two different strands, but now RSE has been incorporated into and integrated into the SPHE curriculum. So that's, I suppose, one of the big changes here.
So RSE is relationship and sex education. Now, before we get into the weeds on that particular subject,
sex education, sorry, relationship sex education, yeah.
Right. Catholic school, we're talking about schools that have Catholics under Catholic patronage, and these schools have a Catholic, what we hear this phrase a lot, ethos, a Catholic ethos. Now, that's not just a notion, that's something which has a kind of, is a concrete thing, but also it has a certain a legal framework to it as well. Yeah. So first of all, can you explain a little bit what the idea of ethos is and what that means.
Well, ethos can sometimes just be narrowly understood as being a school that has religious instruction or religious education. But
Hmm.
ethos is really a way of being. It should inform the entire life of a school, whatever type of ethos it is. So there's obviously Muslim schools in Dublin, a number of them elsewhere in Ireland, they'd have a Muslim ethos. Our schools of the Catholic ethos. So not only would they be expected to teach Catholic religious education, but would also be expected in how they conduct themselves towards pupil, parents, staff, to act in a Catholic manner, and that that ethos, the Catholic spirit, should imbue. It should be the key. Let's say, if you want to put it, it's education and a Catholic key. So it should imbue the entire life of the school. So it's the way of being for the school, in that sense. It's grounded in a number of different things. I mean, the first thing to say is sometimes we're told in Ireland that we're an oddity. Um, there are religious schools all across, or religious ethos schools all across Europe, including in secular France. You know,
Hmm.
they're present, and they're present in substantial numbers in France. And these schools also receive state funding. So, for instance, again in Holland or the Netherlands, a country that would often be thought of, I suppose, being very aggressive and left wing or whatever else, they have constitutional guarantees that allow parents to set up schools according to their own religious philosophical beliefs, as long as it's practical to do so, there's sufficient numbers to do so,
Yeah.
and they will receive funding exactly the same basis as state schools. And that, again, isn't unusual. Right across the EU, there are legal guarantees to allow schools. So that's the first thing. We're not an oddity. Second, obviously, the constitution and two different things. Parents, it's really grand the idea that parents are the primary educators of the children and are
Hmm.
entitled to have schools that reflect their own particular religious or philosophical beliefs. Again, there's a practicality element there, and the court would tease that out over the years. So that's it's the grounding of parents, really, with churches. It's to do with parents as primary educators being entitled. Then the Education Act teases this out, so sets up each school is managed by a board of management. One of the key duties of the board of management in the Education Act is under section 15.2. They must uphold, they're legally obligated to uphold the ethos of the school. So it's not just a nice to have, it's actually a hard legal obligation on school management. They must uphold the particular ethos of the school. So obviously in Catholic schools, they have a legal obligation to uphold the Catholic ethos. And they are accountable to the patron of the school for doing that. Where a board might fail in that, patrons are entitled to take action to move in and try to remedy the situation. So there is a hard legal edge to this as well. And that characteristic spirit isn't just mentioned in terms of the board's duty. You will find in other sections of the Act, so let's say functions of the school in section 9, which will talk about the moral education of pupils, that it must reflect the characteristic ethos of the school and must be done in consultation with parents, which is relevant to this evening's conversation.
Okay, so we're talking now specifically now about this SBHE, which has, well, let's use our language, has been reformed, updated, changed, and this has led to a number of concerns. First of all, well, can you talk about the process that was involved here, of how we got to where we are, the level of the kinds of consultation that occurred, say, working with yourselves, and particularly with parents, because we know that consultation processes are very important these days.
Yes. Look, this goes beyond the NCCA. So for a number of years now, and this has gone back 5, even 10 years, there has been calls for, or I suppose there was different pressure growing within the Dáil in particular, to bring in a new relationship and sex education in schools. And there's currently 2 or possibly even 3 bills actually in front of the Oireachtas, variously called objective sex education bills. So purports to say that it's possible to have an objective, fact-based sex education. So there's been increasing political pressure to do this. Now, in response to that, the Minister for Education kind of said, well, hold off on legislation and we'll set the NCCA to formulate a new SPHE slash RSE curriculum. So the NCCA started working with the various different partner groups in education, that would be the various managed bodies, the trade unions, other bodies working within education, that should also include the representatives of parents to the parent associations. And they started forming this document. So there's very different working groups set up and so on and so forth. There would have been consultation meetings held. I participated in one in Dublin Castle, and that was mainly for organisations, and it was mainly for NGOs or other various aspects of other state organisations, such as the HSE would have had representatives there as well. And then there was a public consultation process. So when the draft was published last autumn, it was put out to public consultation, and there was an online portal opened up that just under 4,000 parents engaged with to give feedback. There was also feedback from teachers. The NCCA also carried out face-to-face work with young people and with teaching staff throughout the country. So a quite substantial amount of engagement, but there were some difficulties. And some of these were not, I have to say in fairness to them, not entirely of the NCCA's making, in that there has been a difficulty with the Parents Association at national level, particularly for primary. I won't get too much into it because I don't want to get any of you or me into kind of legal bother, but there was some particular difficulty within the kind of umbrella organisation for parent associations, and some internal difficulties arising from those, and it wasn't functioning correctly. So in terms of it as a mechanism to represent parents' interests, it broke down somewhat. Now, there was probably little the NCCA could have done of that. That's more a concern for the department rather than, let's say, the NCCA directly. And there was that situation lingered for too long. But in any event, at this crucial moment where this has been formed, we didn't have those mechanisms working correctly. We do know that the parents, as I said, did respond to the consultation thing in fairly large numbers. And apart from the online portal with about 4,000 responses, there was several hundred emails sent to the NCCA as well on this. And parents gave voice to a number of concerns with respect to the curriculum. It is important. There is huge political pressure on this. And I think our audience tonight need to understand that we have a large body of our politicians are quite hostile to the idea of faith-based schools, of schools having a religious ethos. There is a significant number of TDs who would wish to see a full state education system, a uniform, completely state-run, state ethos education system that would have a uniform, neutral, ethical framework. So as part of that, I suppose this became a kind of a wedge issue. So it's just important to understand where politics comes into this, because this just wasn't like a neutral thing that a load of civil servants just set about doing. This arose because of particular political pressure. And certainly we would have been very concerned to have seen TDs attempt to set curriculum through legislation, because we think that would have been quite a dangerous precedent. And in any event, whose ethos was going to actually be reflected. Like when they say objective sex ed bill, like sex ed isn't just a matter of a series of facts. There are a number of ethical judgments that are made. And once you're into that, well, whose ethical judgment? We're fine with other school types, the different ethos types, including the ETBs, that says at post-primary level and educate together, post-primary, they can reflect their own ethos. Perfectly entitled to do so. They obviously, like ourselves, need to consult with parents. But we're Catholic schools. We wanted to ensure that we'd have the ability to reflect our Catholic ethos. But again, quite a number of politicians not only want to dictate like that A, B, and C be taught as part of ORC, they also want to dictate that the Catholic position could not be proposed at all. So some of these bills specifically wish to block any voice being given to the Catholic position on ORC in schools.
So,
sorry,
well, just for clarity here, from some of the reading that I was doing, it seemed to me that some people were suggesting, I don't know if this is reflected in any of the concrete proposals, but there were a number of voices saying that the legislation should be framed in such a way that the curriculum as established in this area would have to be taught as written, irrespective of what the ethos of the school was, and if it was in conflict with the ethos of the school, that the ethos could not be used as a reason or an excuse not to teach that. Am I right? Is that true?
Correct. And not only could they not refuse to teach them, But we wouldn't have been, or under some of these proposed bills, all of which pass second stage in the Dáil, which means that our TDs, I mean, the general principle of second stage votes is just a series by which a bill becomes an act. The second stage vote is the vote where the Dáil basically says, yeah, we think this is a good idea. We accept the general principle. So these bills passed. TDs voted for this. Now, they're unlikely to become law, but you're right, that would have been the effect. But not only that, not only would we've had to teach these things, we also would have been legally disbarred from giving voice to the Catholic position as well.
So that would mean that you wouldn't actually, you couldn't teach it and say, however, there is another viewpoint here or an alternative position, or shall we say, in this instance, diversity would not have been a high value.
Well, correct, because a lot of those who are in favour of secularising the education system generally do it on the grounds that we're becoming a more diverse or plural society. And the response to diversity and pluralism is an enforced things, kind of a bland uniformity that will be enforced across school system and ultimately society. We do not believe that that's a correct approach to pluralism at all. In fact, we actually think a plurality of school choices is a sign of a healthy society. And I mean, for instance, that's why at primary level we're working to see if there's impact at the local level in terms of schools moving out of Catholic patronage to create a greater plurality of choice, if that's what local communities wish for. Because if that wish is there, we understand from our own philosophical standpoint that parents shouldn't be forced to send their children to Catholic schools, but that we create that pluralism. But yeah, that is the effect. So that's what we're up against, I suppose.
Isn't it the case? I've seen some polling done on this, and of course, it is just polling, but there is no doubt that if you compare today with, say, even 30 years ago, the numbers of people in the Republic of Ireland who are practicing Catholics or in any sense actively involved in the church has massively declined. However, at the same time, and in a number of cases certainly at a local level, there have been polls done where parents may not be actively involved in the local church, but they do want their children at the same time to have a Catholic education. And this is not something that some elements of the political world seem to be happy with.
Right. Now, our schools are not just for Catholics. Our schools
Sure.
offer a Catholic education for anybody who wishes a Catholic education for their child. And again, we know in other countries, for instance, that often in the UK and in France, Muslim families find Catholic education very appealing and will choose Catholic schools over other school types in those countries. Because we're very good at education. We've been doing it for a very long time. Catholics have been involved in education for well over 1,500 years. We set up the first universities. When the school system had to be created from scratch in the country, it was done by the heroic efforts of various, in the main female religious orders, but also male religious orders, who from nothing created an education system in Ireland in the aftermath of the penal laws. So this is, it's in the Catholic DNA, as it were. So our schools are for those who are interested in a Catholic education, but they're interested in an authentic Catholic education. Now, yes, we do have some people though who probably aren't sending their children to our schools simply because they have no other choice. And again, that's really something that the state has a legal, I suppose, obligation to resolve. But in practical terms, we're trying to help them in terms of investigating that locally. But we know from the recent investment pilot projects that we carried out at primary school, in fact, in a lot of areas, people are quite open. They might not be Catholic, or they might describe themselves as Latin Catholics or weak Catholics, or non-Catholics, people from other faith backgrounds. But they were against the school leaving Catholic patronage because they still saw a value in Catholic values and beliefs. And they mightn't agree with everything, but they would agree with the general feel of those. And that came across very strong.
Sorry, there's just one thing that, well, there are a number of things here I find, believe that. And I understand you're not a constitutional lawyer, but on one hand, we have a position which is saying this is objective. Now, I'm highly skeptical of the notion that anything which involves values or ethics can be an objective thing that has to be an area at least of debate. And they're saying the ethos cannot be used to stop this being taught, and you cannot teach the alternative even in parallel. And yet, and I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember obviously the perfect, but the constitutional provision, it says something to the effect of that the primary educators of children, moral and physical, shall be the parents.
Yep.
Surely these two ideas are in conflict. That if the parents look at these values and say, these are not my values, how can it be the case that you can say, no, well, we're going to ignore the fact that you've chosen to send your child to a school with this ethos because these, if not identical to my values, but these are the values that are closest to my values. But we're going to say to you, no, you can't do that. But when there's a constitutional, and it's one of the strongest protections in the Constitution are around the family and the rights of parents.
Correct. Yeah. That's ultimately where the grounding that all education has. So schools exist in Irish law and the Irish Constitution, but in the Education Act as well. Schools exist to assist parents in the parents' duty as the primary educator of their children. They exist to serve families in the education of children. And again, this isn't an Irish oddity. The parent is the primary educator. And again, sometimes in public commentary on this, we can be misled into believing that we're kind of weird on this, or it's a hangover from Dev or McQuaid or wherever. We have this in common with international human rights conventions in terms at UN level, but also at EU level and at European Council level. So the European Convention on Human Rights also grounds parents as the primary educators of the children, as does the UN documents. So again, when we're being told or the impression has been given, we're kind of an oddity here at having this, it's not. That is the fundamental grounding of education. And I sometimes think that the attacks on the church's involvement in education are really a disguise for an attack on that role of parents. Because fundamentally, some people philosophically seem to believe that the state should be the main educator. And I think that, ultimately, when we see the church being targeted, really the real target is the prerogative of parents.
Now, will there be a clear, unambiguous right for parents to opt out for in this case?
Yeah, and parents actually have a general right to opt out of any aspect of the curriculum at all, at primary or post-primary. Certainly in my previous work, we would have had some unusual queries where, for instance, one parent, I don't know why, but he in particular did not want his children learning anything about the monastic movement in Ireland. Well, he also objected to religious education, but as part of the history curriculum, he said he didn't want to learn anything about it. And that's his right. That was the right of the parent. It's Section 30 of the Education Act is for that. That is, well, parents can withdraw the child from any aspect of the curriculum. And in fact, in our submission, because this was coming up in not so much directly from the NCCA, but in other contributors to the process, there was a continual questioning of should parents be allowed off their children out of SPHE, and certainly in CEP submission to the NCCA, we voted quite a lot of it to defending the prerogatives of parents and primary educator, and to their right to opt their children out if they so wish. Because if we don't stand for that, we don't really stand for anything. So in fact, yeah, our submission, because again, we saw this as being one of the arguments put forward in this entire debate, and we were very determined to counter it. Because that right for parents to opt out is fundamental. Because otherwise, they're no longer the primary educator if they can't determine it.
However, there's not much use having a right to opt out if you have no information about what's being taught. So this demands that there has to be a great deal of transparency about what actually is going into the curriculum, and the parents need to know. And if you don't know, would you say they need to inform themselves?
Well, I would. Every school has to have an RSE policy. So that's the first starting point. And parents are obviously entitled to see all policies of the school, including the RSE policy. And whenever that policy is being revised, there'll be a consultation process. So parents are certainly entitled to see that. And that lays out some fundamental approach of school to RSE. Apart from that, parents again are entitled to ask what resources are being used. And if third parties are coming in as well, parents should be informed of that. So there should be no difficulty in a parent writing to the school and just asking, obviously in a polite and civilized manner or whatever else, for a copy of the RSE policy and just a list of the resources that the school be engaging with for that. Now, I will say just on this, the current specification that it was just released today, it's been released somewhat late. Right? This was expected some months ago. So that schools may not actually have curricular resources sorted out yet. But just the parents are writing in today or coming weeks or even first thing in September to ask what resource are you going to use. Schools may not have had time to figure that out yet because this specification was only released today. The post-primary school year is almost at an end, so we're out of school time. Which is just a school
Sure,
wouldn't be covering anything up if they say they don't have it. It's just they don't have it yet.
I understand. But and I ask this because I've come across a couple of cases about this where parents have gone to schools and asked for information about both materials, extra materials, and if any other groups are coming in, and they have received either no response or a very limited response. I just want to be clear. Parents are entitled to this information. So if the school doesn't cooperate, they can insist that they are told for exactly what materials are being used and who's being brought in to deliver this subject.
Absolutely, yeah. No, there should be transparency about this. And again, I know the audience here this evening will be, but it's just polite approaches first. It off, and obviously it can be escalated to the board. But yeah, there shouldn't be any particular drama about providing this. But as I said, just for anybody who's immediately going to get out to schools, this may be something schools don't have sorted out till October or even November of the next school year. But just to, there's no, if there's a fogginess in the response for now, it could just be because the school is still trying to figure out what they're going to do. Make that point. But yeah, parents are entitled to information.
So if a question coming in here and from persons, a member of the board and a parent, and they're saying that the school has made it so difficult to opt out that they don't give any information on the RSA curriculum, and many parents don't have a clue exactly. So to go back, not just on the question of information, if they want their children to opt out, that is their simple right, and the school has to accommodate that. Is that correct?
Yeah, they do. It's a legal right under the Act. Now, schools may have some practical difficulty, and parents, anyway, the parents will have to discuss that with the year head or the principal in terms of the practicalities of how it will happen. But it is a legal right; it can't be obstructed. So that's there, and there really shouldn't be any difficulty about getting detail on what resources are going to be used.
Okay, so speaking practically, if somebody, here we're obviously we're only talking about schools that have under Catholic patronage. We're not talking about other schools. If a parent has difficulty in either accessing information regarding what's being taught and or opting out of this kind of thing, what should they do? Should they go? Should they go to the board? Should they go to the patron? To the bishop?
First instance, no. First, not every Catholic school has a bishop as patron. It could be some of the trusts or religious order. First instance, obviously, just seek a meeting with the principal. So it's a kind of, you've made your request to have to come back. You might engage in some emails and telephone calls. Ultimately, you can ask for a meeting. If it isn't resolved there, then yes, the parent is entitled to seek redress from the board, as it were. The school should also have a complaint policy that should lay out how complaints are to be made. Now, it's always informal at the start, and most difficulties aren't out, or normally aren't out. Very few complaints really escalate. Most schools should be focused on just resolving these things informally and peacefully enough. Look, the thing is, schools aren't going to be operating in bad faith on this. I would say RSE and SPHE have proven a huge practical difficulty in schools to actually implement. Teachers are generally not fond of engaging with the subject. It can, one of the big problems that the NCCA themselves identified, because there's a big thing, again, politicians were very anxious to say that ethos was the main block on delivering effective RSE, or that to be understood. The NCCA turned around after study and said, actually, no, it's teacher confidence and competence. the teachers are lacking in the skills and in the confidence to actually engage with the subject.
Mhm.
And that problem hasn't really been addressed since. I mean, it is one of the big problems, let's say, in terms of this. We're still left with the problem of not having an adequate number of teachers in the system who can really engage with this topic. Um, so again, you may find a fogginess from a school, but that can simply become because there has
Yeah.
always been traditional difficulty with engaging with the subject.
No, just for clarity, we're talking the new course in in
Yeah,
SPH. It's not being rolled out for everybody at the same time. It's first coming in a junior cycle, then
junior
how
cycle. So first to
sense of
third
progress.
year in post-primary schools, yeah. And then next year, so September 24, it'll be implemented for the leaving cert cycle or the senior cycle. And then in September 25 for the primary schools. Well, this one that we've seen today, so the junior cycle effectively sets the baseline for, so obviously, if you can imagine the senior cycle, they're just up the tempo, as it were. For primary, they'll bring it down. So it will be age appropriate, moved up or down, depending. But there will be a common links between. So what we're seeing today is the baseline from which the other two will be set.
Yeah.
There will be public consultation. The parents will have the opportunity to provide engagement with the NCCA on both senior cycle and primary, and they'll come generally in the autumn. So this coming autumn, there'll be an opportunity, let's say, on senior cycle and autumn next year, then on primary.
So for parents who are concerned about the content of it, even now, if they want to express that concern, to whom should they go? Should they go to their local TD? Should they go where should they go?
Well, I would say, yeah, in terms of the future development of this, I mean, certainly letting TDs know, because again, the root of all this has been political pressure, right? So letting TDs know from the ground up of concerns is not an appropriate thing. The other thing is to engage those consultation processes when they come out. Now, I know they're recently the teacher did not exactly give a huge cause for confidence in how the state views consultation processes, but it did have an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And in fairness, I will say to the NCCA, in terms of the submissions from the Catholic bodies, a couple of things we have seen in the final documents. So, for instance, just to give a few examples, and this is going to sound slightly funny, but Catholics are the romantics. We sought the word loving be included with loving relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems unusual to have a course in relationships that didn't mention love, but we were the ones who went looking for it and got it. The other thing was there was a lot of talk of rights-based. We said that's fine, rights are good, but we also wanted responsibilities to be mentioned. And there was not resistance from the NCCA, but some of the NGOs, there was some resistance from them to the idea of putting in the word responsibilities. We got that in because, again, we believe it was very important. People understand we have obligations to each other. Parents did have an effect. There was huge pressure on the NCCA to be quite radical on pornography. The parental response was definitive and, let's say, loud. I mean that in a positive way on the pornography question. And certainly the NCCA responded, listened to that as well. What's going to, there's a further guidance issue on pornography in particular. I will say we're quite happy with it. It talks primarily about the harm that porn does. It also has a guidance that pornographic content is not engaged with in the classroom. But it talks specifically, and just for your audience, just to put reassurance, it says, pornography is not a good place to learn about sex, not reflective. It can be disturbing and damaging for young people. It's violent and harmful in nature. To avoid it is a very healthy choice. In fact, is the word used for you. So it is not, and that reflects the fact that parental engagement did actually have a very significant effect there, because there were elements within the HSE who were pushing very strongly for far more radical, shall we say, sex positive or ethical porn kind of view. And I know some public Catholic commentators are very strong on that. So in that case, the engagement worked. With respect to other things, I suppose there was, other changes came in as well. So certainly there was groups, I think Catholic groups certainly, but also feminist groups engaged on the gender idea. So ideas like a gender spectrum were dropped. And ideas like cisgender and the terminology. And there was a phrase, sex was defined as, or I can't remember, but assigned at birth was used. It's now being replaced with registered at birth. And these were again brought about through the consultation process. Now, we've seen some of the companies have jumped the gun and produced resources for schools, and they've included things like spectrum and cisgender and so on and so forth. In fact, these elements were specifically rejected by the NCCA, so there is a question as to why these companies have included them, I suppose, in their materials. And again, schools will have still some judgment to avoid that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I'm aware of the time, that there's a certain time for sure, but before I finish up, that we've had a number of questions of people adverting to situations where really quite young children, I mean, not quite small children in primary school, were being taught around sexual issues. Now, and in this case, a number of cases they were referring to not in Catholic ethos schools.
Okay.
I think maybe this, that is in a sense, speaks to the value of having a diversity in education. That if this isn't the kind of, if these are not the kinds of values, this is not the kind of ethos you want your child exposed to, well then it's important to have schools there that will offer a different set of values, a different approach. And therefore, if you want your children educated in a different context with different sets of values, well, that's your choice as the educator of your children. But that diversity leaves that choice at least open, as long as parents have the information and the knowledge about what's being taught.
Correct, and that's where, I mean, some parents will prefer a different ethical approach to be taken to relationship with sex education. And again, if the school's there to cater for that, that's fine. We support that because that's what because we support parents as primary educators. What we wish to defend, though, particularly was the right of Catholic schools to give a confident and positive expression to our ethical view of these things. Now, we were also clear, though, because again, this has been the thought coming from Rome for some years, not just under the present Pope, but previous popes. The Catholic education should engage in dialogue and encounter with other points of view. And again, I know from talking to other groups of parents, there's a lot of concern, but we produce our own resources that will be made available to Catholic schools to use. And that presents different perspectives on gender. It gives a full presentation on the Catholic view of gender issues, but also presents the other view. And I know there's concern about that among some parents, but I'd say our young people are already aware of these theories. And I think we're better off laying them out and helping our young people critically engage them and to critically engage and understand the Catholic perspective, and particularly Catholic perspective offered with confidence. So our resources will provide that dialogue encounter on a number of ethical issues within the thing. Funny enough, this is the approach that was taken for me when I was educated back in 1988 and 93 in St. Hynes in Mullingar. The priest there did a superb job in actually preparing us for the arguments we're going to face later on in life, in terms of presenting the Catholic view with other views and encouraging us to debate them and understand them fully. You know, that approach, I think, stood me well through life. Again, we'll be putting that in. But we were very, very definite. We absolutely believe that we have the right, and the parents expect us to give the Catholic proposition with confidence and in a very positive way. That's what we'll be doing. And I'll just say one other thing, Michael. In Ireland, we have a tendency to view schools, I suppose, as being a solution to social problems. And our politicians generally, you know, if there's a difficulty with the latest fixation I see this morning in Morning Ireland is our diet as a nation, right? So sure, as you know, life follows day, we're going to have some TD standing up and saying schools should teach more about diet. And every social difficulty or social ill, generally the imaginative policy response is what schools will deal with it. But schools have an important role. And on this stuff like relationship, sex education, schools have an important role, but our role is limited. Because our young people are in a culture, they're in family cultures, which are very influential, but they're in the general culture, which is the device in their hands is far more powerful than schools. And there needs to be a realistic understanding of that. And I'm not just saying, well, then it's up to parents to correct all these things, but for instance, I recently appeared on the Katie Hannon show. We were talking about the harm that pornography causes. And Peter Tobin was on, I made the point that France is getting ready from this September to bring in legislation to make it far more difficult for young people to access porn. Now, in this country, our policy response is, well, schools should teach that porn is damaging and do it. But our policymakers don't seem to believe that they have any role in trying to stop the supply of this stuff. Whereas we can see the French state is actually moving to restrict, and it's not going to be perfect. And the response from some TDs as well, sure, they'll find a way around it. But sure, that's true of alcohol and tobacco. But we still have laws in place to try and restrict and slow down the access of young people to those things. We need to understand, like I was just saying again, you talked earlier about engaging TDs, but parents as well as we talk about the concerns of schools, should we get onto TDs, what are they doing to restrict or to make it more difficult for young people to access porn? It's not enough just to say to schools or parents what it's up to you. What are the policymakers going to do at a regulatory level to address this stuff? I just think that's really important. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to thank you for your time, but I would say that perhaps we might have you back again, possibly even quite soon, because the number of practical questions that we might we're getting quite a lot of engagement here. There's certain practical questions about how parents and board members might address certain issues, and maybe we can get back to you and talk about this a little bit more detail in the future. But for now, thank you, Alan Hynes. I'd like to thank you, our viewers, for having joined us tonight. Before we go, as I said, you can hit on the subscribe button, or anything, if you can hit on that donate button, anything you can give will be used to the best of our abilities to defend those life and values that we all share. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Alan, and good night and have a safe time.